Let's turn now to our fourth segment that we've had with David Dellio, who is the chair of theology at the Department of Jesuit High School in New Orleans, president of Image and Likeness. He's joined us throughout Lent. Dave, as always, thanks for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Hey, Bo, great to be back.
So let's talk about the 20th century and how there's been sort of a revival of trying to attempt to talk about how important the heart is, and it not be just merely, like we said, it's not merely the emotions or merely the will, but a biblical concept that is at the core of what we're up to.
So I want to talk about two authors coming from very different places. The first is Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was a wonderful Catholic philosopher, just a wonderful person, but a great teacher in the church. Someone who's kind of gotten forgotten, who has been forgotten, and who deserves a rereading. He came out with a book that I think was really a landmark book in 1965 called The Heart. And it's called an analysis of human and divine affectivity. And Hildebrand kind of says, phenomenology is about paying attention. It's about paying attention to like what's going on inside you, what's going on outside you, and kind of looking at it and allowing things to kind of like allowing interiorly your feelings to speak, but allowing exteriorly, like what do objects in the world around us kind of reveal to us. So phenomenology is a big word that just says paying attention and allowing things to reveal themselves, but having the patience to do it. And he really exemplifies that. One of the things that he wanted to do was to say that the heart had been completely maligned and almost kind of washed away by the 20th century. And he wanted to recover it as a philosophical subject. And the way he did it was he recovered it through affectivity, which is not reduced to the emotions. What he's saying, though, is that the heart is the central way, in a sense, that we kind of connect the intellect, the will, the mind, and the body. And so what he wants to say is when you pay attention to your affections, which include like your passions and your feelings and your instincts and things like that, you realize that like that is where on the ground we meet each other all the time. Many times you can be talking with a person, they can be saying the right words, but their affect, how they look, how they appear to you, they can be very agitated or they can be very peaceful. But you're going to make a read on those words based on what you're seeing. And so what von Hildebrand wants to talk about is it's connected to the way we kind of feel and relate to one another through our bodies. And that's the key thing, is he's recovering to get us away from just being thought machines, but to getting into like, where's our body in all of our thinking? My only critique of it is I think he goes too far to reduce it to our affections. I think it's a study worth having, and I think historically it really was important for the Catholic Church to recover an idea of the heart, because he then relates it to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and he shows kind of in Scripture how Jesus is always, he's acting and thinking and doing from the heart, how he's healing and whatnot. The second person that comes in about 35 years later, he's coming from a very different tradition. He's an evangelical Protestant. His name's Dallas Willard, and actually was I ended up having a really nice coffee with an evangelical pastor who led me to this book. And it's a wonderful book in so many ways. It's called The Renovation of the Heart, and it was published in 2002. And Willard is coming much more from a scriptural place. And when he wants to kind of talk about is that we need to renovate our hearts, because the heart is the center of our spirit. Now, Willard kind of equates the heart to the will, which I think is also a mistake. So letting the heart just be the heart, I think, is the most important thing that I've been talking to you, Bo, about in these last 4 podcasts, is that we have to see it as it's this kind of the center in the coordinating power of all the powers of the soul. But the really important thing is that it is involved in our thinking, in our willing, in our feeling, and in our perceiving. It's involved in all of that. And, and Willard does some wonderful things there, talking about how the heart is affected by sin and what that means. And it's worth looking at.
No, I like that. Real quick to point out that this can make sense of why the physical heart becomes the analogy that it is because since the heart pumps blood to anything else your body does relies on the heart, and so there's this real way that the heart is connected to all that you do. So similarly, the spiritual heart of who we are, in a similar way, the powers of the soul, it's as if they won't have the blood sufficient to do their jobs, whether that's the will, whether that's the intellect, except for the heart.
That's right. And Pope Francis makes that exact argument in Dilexit Nos, and so that's where I guess that's a great layup or alley-oop for us to kind of conclude this. Just to say that, but Pope Francis, he has the summative kind of encyclical on this, right? It's a masterstroke, and everyone who has the time and the ability, or even just to go run the encyclical through a ChatGPT to get the summary points, it's still worth it. But Vatican II in Gaudium Spes 14 says the heart is the depth of man, where he is alone with God. And that's really kind of touching on St. John Henry Newman, what Newman thought about God and the conscience. It also touches on kind of what John Paul II is talking about in the theology of the body, especially the spousal meaning of the body written on the heart, and the language of the body. That's very kind of heart-centered. But Pope Francis kind of leaves us, it's his last encyclical before he passes, and he really makes the point you just made, Bo, is that the ancients understood the reason why they thought the spirit was in the blood and that the heart was the core of the person was because any part of you that doesn't have blood is going to die. But they were not foolish. They didn't think like physically the heart is the same thing, but they understood that there's a spiritual analogy to what's going on in the soul. And what Pope Francis says is there's some very important things. The heart, I'm giving you some summative points, is the heart is the center to the contemporary crisis in our fragmentation, consumerism, and soulless technology. Think of AI. AI, no matter what it can do, it can mirror human thinking in certain ways, but it cannot have a heart. And what Pope Francis wants to say is that poetry and love are necessary to save our humanity. And there's a beautiful line, an algorithm cannot capture that.
Right.
He then takes the kind of the human situation, like where we are right now. So he's not saying, oh, the heart's a great old word that we used to use in the Bible. He's saying the sooner we recover that and see that as the core of who we are, the better we get on with dealing with what's coming. And what's coming is really the kind of the disruptions of the age of AI. But then he makes a deeper connection. He follows kind of Hildebrand's argument, which is he then connects that to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And, this is where I think the encyclical maybe is a little bit uneven, because in that part of the encyclical, he kind of reduces the heart back to the affections. And I wonder if he was thinking of Dietrich von Hildebrand when he did it, because that's very much Hildebrand's book. But nevertheless, what it is that the Sacred Heart of Jesus kind of explodes out for all of us. So in other words, it makes us, we're not just into our own hearts. It's not a self where we're kind of like cauterized and kind of stuck in ourselves. The heart is meant to open us out to others and to be able to become wounded so that we can then go ask for God's grace to become healed. And that's what kind of having a devotion to the Sacred Heart, which St. Ignatius was attached to, and so many others, why it's just so important to have that, not only devotion, but the devotion is you go into the heart to get out to heal and serve others.
No, look, we're at the end
of
here. So I just got to say this point because it's so great. Look, poetry will defeat AI because where AI fragments and then pretends to unify, poetry is about reduction to the simple connections, right? Like the poetry is about things that cannot be broken into parts. And our heart is that place where God, who is the most simple, right? The inability to break God into parts where we can sort of just like make a catalog of his parts, but that we have to experience God in his fullness or we don't experience him at all. That's what the poetic, that's what the artistic, that's what we've been talking about with truth is after. And the Sacred Heart, right, is that poetic fact that God said to make himself truly known as Jesus Christ. He, the divine God, took on a human heart. And that, as it were, right, the poem of God cannot be reduced to anything else or divided into anything else. And
that's right.
That's absolutely brilliant. We're short on time, so if people want to find out more, because next week we'll get really into this, But Image and Likeness, it's all about this stuff. Where can people find out more about it?
Image and Likeness, imageandlikeness.org.
He's the president of Image and Likeness, chair of theology department at Jesuit High School in New Orleans. He's been joining us throughout Lent. Dave, thanks for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Absolutely, Bo. Great to talk to you again.